Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. I know there's probably a few more people that might join as we go along, but we have a really good group to start off with here. So just wanted to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us again. As you know, we've been doing this intertribal education program for the last few months. And very thrilled to have Dr. Honish from the House of Wellness, so Ho Chunk Nation. She offered to do a presentation for us on a topic that I feel like is something that most parents don't know a lot about. I know a lot of times there's a lot of comparing one kid to another and looking at your cousins' kids and things like that. So I think it's going to be really important for parents to understand, just looking at their own kid, what's important for your child in their growth. So really pleased that this is a topic that Dr. Honish brought forth, because like I said, I think we're really going to get a lot out of this. So I'm going to pass over to you. Go ahead, Dr. Honish, and everybody enjoy.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for spending some time. I'm a pediatrician, and so growth is very near and dear to my heart, partly because if I see a child in clinic, if I look at growth curves, if you see that there is normal growth or the growth looks good, it's very reassuring. And so it's a really helpful piece of information. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about how it is that we measure it and how it is that we use it. When people come to a clinic for a well visit for their child, sorry, it's not going there. Kind of the two big questions are, is my child growing well and is my child developing well? And so kind of one of the two big questions that we try to answer at well visits is all about growth. So let's just talk a little bit more about that. When we're looking at growth, these four things are the things that I'm going to kind of talk about through this session. So kind of why is it that it's important? And then how is it that we measure it? And then focusing on those growth curves that you've probably, if you've gone to well visits, you've seen growth curves, and trying to take a look at those and figure out what they really mean and how we use those will be a big part of what we'll talk about. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about different ways that are used to estimate children's growth. And what we'll find out is none of them are very good estimates, but still we'll talk a little bit about that. The first thing then we want to talk about is kind of why is it that we check growth? And one big reason, it's a very good test of a number of systems. So if growth is going well for a child, lots of things are growing well. So kind of most obviously, the digestive system has to work well. You know, it starts from the top and goes to the bottom. So if a child has thrush and has a sore mouth, or if they have constipation and they aren't moving poop through and they're uncomfortable when they feed, lots of digestive problems can cause trouble with growth. The nervous system is involved, and there are two parts of that. The brain is one part of the nervous system that's involved, and a newborn exam involves checking suck. So I'll put my finger in a baby's mouth to see how, if their suck is nice and coordinated, because they need to have a good suck to be able to swallow, and that starts with the brain. The gut has its own nervous system, and so if you have any trouble with the nerves of the gut system, feeding won't go well and growth won't go well. There are lots of hormones involved in growth. One that we think of a lot is thyroid hormones. There are others as well, but if growth isn't going well, certainly we would think, is there a concern about a thyroid problem? And then maybe the most important of all is all the social systems. So if a child is having trouble with growth, are they getting enough food? What kind of food are they getting? Are they stressed? All of those things come from a review of the social system, and that can be an important tip-off that there's something that we can hopefully help with in that area. Now let's talk a little bit about how we measure children. One thing is that what we do changes at age 2. So from birth to age 2, at every well visit, we should measure 3 things. We'll measure a child's length, we'll measure weight, and we measure the distance around their head or the circumference of their head. After age 2, we stop measuring the head, and then we move to just measuring height and weight. So there's a difference there. We measure lengths in children that are under 2, and the kind of the definition is that a length is measured if a child is laying down. So we lay a baby down and measure them. That's a length. And then at age 2, we start having children stand up against the wall, and we try to measure their height. So if it's measured standing, then that's called height. Lots of the growth curves cheat, and they just call it stature, because that could be either length or height, and then they don't have to change the name that's on it. I'll just tell you, from 2-year-olds typically don't like to stand at the wall very well. So one measurement that is often a bit of trouble is the height of a 2-year-old. And I would very commonly remeasure them in clinic by laying them down and check their length just to make sure we got a good measurement. But these are the things that we measure. One problem with getting measurements is that, as I know I don't have to tell anyone, is that children, babies and toddlers, are very active and they don't like to be measured. Even a little baby, a few days old, can struggle and not care to have their head measured. And so just having good strategies for getting a good measurement is important, kind of distracting the child so the child's relaxing, and just having good strategies and good equipment to use to make those measurements, because getting accurate measurements is really important, or otherwise the growth curves don't mean anything. The weight of a child is a common sense measurement. We all know about weight. The length is easy to imagine. One thing that we measure, though, is the head circumference. And so that one is something that's a little bit more unusual for most people. So again, it's the distance around the head. So it is a circumference. It is often abbreviated OFC, which stands for occipital frontal circumference. And that's just the name of the 2 bones that we measure around. So this baby, we are measuring from the occipital bone, and that's the bone in the back, to around through the frontal bone. And how you position that tape is really important to get a good measurement. So in the front, as you watch people measure, that tape should be just above the eyebrows. And on the back, it should be at the part of the head that is the most prominent. Often we have a little bump at the back of our head, and that's where that tape should be to get a good head circumference measurement. I like turning babies to the side like this, because I can see both. Is the tape in the right spot in the back? Is the tape in the right spot in the front? And I have them face their parents, because they're always happier looking at their parent rather than looking at me. And so that can help get a good measurement. All right, so those are the things that we measure. So now let's move to the third item. This will take a little bit longer to sort out, because let's take a dive in and let's take a look at those growth curves. So the growth curves allow us to make 2 important comparisons. So the most important, so one thing that we do to compare is we compare this child to a large group of other children, many thousands of other children, just to see how their growth compares to others. In the curves that we use for under 2-year-olds, those measurements come from 6 different countries. So it's not just comparing it to a United States population, it's compared to a worldwide population. And I think that's important to keep in mind. And again, it's a very large population, many thousands of people. I think even more importantly, the growth curves allow us to follow this child's growth and see how this child is growing over time. And if we've got concerns, this is what's really important. And so getting those accurate measurements is really important, because If I'm at 9 months, I can't go back and remeasure the 6-month-old. So kind of always making sure we've got accurate measurements so we can follow this child across time is really important. This is what a growth curve looks like, and we're going to talk a lot more about it. This one is one that would have been used when we were all doing it on paper, when we had paper charts. Now, when you go to the doctor, they've got a computer and it will create a growth curve, which is going to be very similar to this. It may look a little different, but the principles are all still the same. This one, in the days again of paper, we needed to make sure that we used the right curve. So a girl's growth curve would be pink, and the boys' growth curve would be blue, because we wanted to make sure we were charting it on the right chart. They're pretty similar. So here's the boys' curve and here's the girls' curve, and they're very, very close. You know, if you looked carefully at age 1 year, you can see that the girls' weight is not quite at 12, and this is in kilograms, but the boys' weight is a little closer to 12. So the overall curves look very similar, but they are just a little bit different. When we look at the weight, again, we measure the weight in kilograms. If you want to hear what it is in pounds and ounces, if we've weighed a child in kilograms, the computer will make that conversion, and so people certainly can tell you what that is. But on the charts, it's plotted in kilograms, which is the metric version. So roughly a kilogram is about 2 pounds. It's a little more, but about 2 pounds. And then you can see that at the bottom, this is just the age. So we start putting measurements on this curve at birth, and then at every visit after that up to a year, and then out again out to 2 years, this curve is used. When a child becomes 2 years old, then the curve switches and we go to a curve which is from age 2 years to age 20 years. So then this becomes the measurement that you'll see. This is the growth curve on paper. Nobody's going to see this because the computers separate them. So if you just kind of look up at the top, this is, as I said, this is called stature. This is the measurement of height. And so as a child, as 2, they'd be here, 4, 6, and as they get up to being a teenager, then they would get to this point. But this is just a height growth curve for ages 2 years to 20 years. And a version of this is in the electronic medical record. So this is it's the same curve. It just looks different in Epic or whatever system you're using. And what you can see here is that children, everybody knows this, children get taller and get taller and get taller until they get to a certain age, and then their height levels off, and that's their adult height. So you can see how you can follow a child's growth through time. I'm going to focus more on the, partly because this is the Breastfeeding Coalition, I'm going to focus more on the growth curves under 2 years of age. So let's go back to that curve. So again, the weight is measured here. Over on the right side, and the people may cover it up, I've circled, there are percentiles over there. I actually wanted to ignore them at this point anyway, so it's perfectly helpful that you can't see those percentiles. We will come back to that. We'll talk about what each of these different lines means. In general, what I would say is if a child is following any of the lines, that is normal growth. Which line it is not as important, but we'll come back, we'll talk more about that. So if we had a child, this is again, it's a pink, this is a girl's growth curve. We might have a child who has come to their 1 year well visit, and so we see a growth curve that looks like this. If you see this, what you can see is this child has followed this same line and has, at each well visit, their weight has been at about the same line. As soon as you see that, this is good growth. This child is following one of the lines. It happens that this child is following a line that's closer to the bottom of the options rather than one that's closer to the top of the options. And what that means is this child is smaller than average when compared to those many thousand children that were used to generate the growth. But this is a normal curve for a smaller child. There's nothing abnormal there at all. One thing that you can notice when you look at growth curves is that children grow at different rates. In all three measurements, for weight, for length, for head measurement, in the first 6 months of growth, the rate of growth is very, very fast. We couldn't possibly keep that up over time. And what you can see is that even as children get to kind of between 6 and 12 months, all three of those measurements slow down. Children do not grow as fast in between 6 and 12 months, and they don't grow as fast between 1 and 2 years. One thing that can lead to is people with a toddler can often come in and they'll say, well, my child doesn't eat as much as they used to. At 15 months, they aren't eating as much, they don't seem to eat as much as they used to. And part of it is they don't have to because they're not growing as fast. They don't have to fuel that very high rate of growth. When we look at growth curves, we really do try to look at all of those three measurements at the same time. This is, you can see here's the weight curve and here's the length curve, and the shapes of the curves are similar, but they're different. When we plot points on the curve, the textbooks will tell you that this is what they should always look like, that a child, their weight curve will follow kind of the same line as their length, and then it would be the same as their head measurement. I didn't put head measurement on there just because I couldn't get it the size right, but this is what the textbooks will say. I'll tell you that this isn't always true, but looking at this, what I would certainly say is these are beautiful growth curves. This is a child who is growing well because you can see they're following the path of a line. And if that's all you see on this growth curve, that's all that you really need to see. That's what's important. What I'd also say is they are following a line that's toward the top. And so this is a child who is a little bigger than average. And I would also say that the people at this institution did a really good job of measuring because those lines look beautiful. And if we have inaccurate measurements at all, you'll see a little wiggle. We'll look at that later on. But these are normal growth curves because they're following the line. And again, if the only thing you remember from this whole talk is if the measurements follow the path of one of the lines, that's normal, that's fine. That is by far and away the most important thing that we are going to talk about. All right, when you look at growth curves, as I said, sometimes growth curves don't match up exactly. So here is a growth curve where the weight is on the middle line, but the length is one line higher. They don't match, the lines don't match. This is perfectly normal. And again, kind of as soon as you see that the growth curves follow the line, you know that it's normal. But what is happening is that this child is taller than weighs more than half of the kids in the group, but is taller than about 8 out of 10. So this is a long, lean child. So if I look at this growth curve, my next look is over to the parents. And if this child has tall, lean parents, then I know why the growth curves look like this, because the child is tall and lean as well. So that's perfectly normal. Here's a growth curve comparing, again, it's the two lines aren't on, the two curves don't have lines, growth following the same lines. So the weight again is coming up on the average line, and this time it's the head measurement. And the head measurement you can see is way up on the top line. And so looking at this, my inkling here would be that head measurement still looks normal because the child is following the curve. I would bet that this is a child who comes from a family with people who have big heads. And my screening question for does your family have big heads is when you go to the store, if you see the hat and it says one size fits all, do you know that not to buy it because it's not going to fit you? And parents go, oh yes, no, I absolutely know that. And so then again, they've got a bigger than average head. If the curve follows the line, that's typically normal growth. At this point, one thing I would say is looking at the growth curves, I can't make any judgment about this child's head until I turn and ask the parents, or I look at the parents and I see if they've got a big head, or I examine the baby and make sure the baby's exam is normal, or I ask history, like the hat question. The growth curves are just one piece of information. They don't tell me everything I need to know, but they're very, very helpful. One time that a growth curve can look unusual is when you have a newborn. So if a newborn comes home, we have a birth measurement from the hospital, and that's plotted at that very beginning line. So here's the birth measurement. And one thing, children generally don't lose weight, except newborns can. And so in the first couple of weeks of life, this is a curve, this is a normal curve of this baby girl lost weight. We would have seen her at 2 days, been a little worried, saw her two days later. We're worried enough, we saw her kind of frequently, but then you can see she hit the bottom in probably 4 or 5 days, and then she started to gain weight. And then my best predictor of where this line should end up is that birth weight measurement. So in this case, she lost weight and then climbed up, got back to that same line where she started, and then follows that line. This is perfectly normal growth. At this point, then we can look fondly back on how worried we were about this child's weight or how worried we weren't. But again, this is a normal pattern. Newborns do lose weight. All right, those were normal growth. So here are a couple of abnormal growth curves. Here is a growth curve where you can see the length looks normal. So this is a little boy because it's blue. This boy started off and has gained length and is following the line. That is normal growth. When you compare that with the weight curve, what you can see is this child started off gaining weight following a normal line, but then it has dropped off a little bit. The rate of the increase has slowed down. This child has gained weight at every visit. This child has not lost weight, but the rate of the increase has slowed down, and this child just should be gaining weight faster than this. These curves don't have as many lines as the ones you would see from one of our computers. Kind of one rule of thumb is if the growth falls more than 2 lines, then we start paying attention to that and try to, again, ask a few questions and do a good exam of the baby to try to figure out what's going on here. The reverse of that is this curve. Again, looking at the length for this baby, you can see that he is getting taller normally because he's following the path of the line, but you can see he's gaining weight too fast. This does not look like these curves. This is a growth curve that this child is just gaining weight too fast. It is not normal because you're not following the path of the line, okay? And then here's a growth curve. This is one that the measurements are just not very accurate. And so it really, just a reminder, if for all of us to try to get good measurements at well visits, because it's just hard, at this point, it's hard to know, should this baby be following this line or should this baby be following this line? I can't tell. And so then again, it's just important to follow over time. So then what I would say is, well, we're going to make sure we get good measurements from now on. If we've got concerns, we would follow up more. We'll get good measurements and then we'll see where we are, okay? This is a common one too. This one measurement is way off, and you can just see it's going to be on the computer record, but it's from a past visit because it's not the most recent one. And it was just, maybe typed in wrong. And so that dot is just not on the line, and then you just ignore it. It's a measurement that is just not correct. All right, one thing that we should avoid is this one. When we see children at any institution, we should, even if they're coming for a sore throat, we should measure their length or height. if that's not, if you just assume, if you just put in the same number from the last time, then you get this. I don't believe that. This is just the same as it was at that last visit, but this child got taller. That point should really be up here somewhere. So just making sure to not just put in an old measurement is important. All right, to summarize all of that, really again, if growth follows the path of the line, it's generally normal. So as soon as you see you're following the line, that's good. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit. There were numbers on the right side of those growth curves, which I've so far ignored, but now I want to talk a little bit more about those. They are percentiles, and it's important to try to understand what a percentile is, and it's different than a percentage. So a percentage is something we use much more commonly, and we have lots of experience using percentages. So if there's a sale and it's 25% off, you know that of the total price, you're going to save 1/4 of that price. But percentiles we don't use so often, but what we do use them for is we use them in growth curves. So let's see if we can talk a little bit about what a percentile is. It is not a percentage, and why that's important. So a percentage, first of all, that's some fraction of one whole item. So of this whole slice of watermelon, if I got most of it, I might have 90%. If I got 75% of it, I got 3/4 of it. 50% of it is half of it, but it's some part of a whole. So again, just belaboring the point, half of it is 50%. Again, percent is what we are used to using. This is, a very common measurement. A percentile is a different thing. A percentile is not some part of a whole. A percentile tells you where you fit in a group. So we'll be looking at growth curves. So kind of where does this child's weight fit in a group is going to be the big question. It could be other things. You could, where does my car's mileage fit in the mileage of all the kinds of cars that I might be choosing to buy. You can compare other things as well, but we will be comparing growth measurements to a large group of other children. All right, to talk about percentiles, then let's start here. Here's a group. Here is the complete group of these creatures, these dogs and cats. You can tell I'm a dog person because there are more dogs than cats, sorry. Okay, so in this group, we are comparing the height of some of the members of the group to the heights of the rest of the group. So the two that are in the middle have a height which is at the 50th percentile. What that tells me is they are taller than half, they're taller than 3, and they're shorter than half, they're shorter than 3. They are at the 50th percentile for height. It is not a percentage. This dog doesn't have, it's not half as big as this one. That would be a percentage. It doesn't matter how tall is the tallest person. This dog is perfectly healthy and normal being at its own height. It is not a percentage. It's not how big compared to the other one. It just puts you in a position in the group. Here's a different group, a little bit bigger group of people. And again, the same thing applies. So if you are, let's see if I can drag this over. You need to see my pictures for this. So here is a group of people. They are arranged in height. So roughly, it isn't quite true, but it's very close. So here's George Clooney. You can see he is taller than half of these people, and he's shorter than the other half of these people. So his height is at the 50th percentile. He is taller than half and shorter than half. He's not half as big as the big person. It's again, a percentile tells you where you fit in the group. And then here's Liam Neeson. he is about 3/4 of the way to the top. So he's taller, not just than half, but he's taller than almost 3/4. And so he is at the 75th percentile because he is taller than an average of 75 out of 100, or 75%, in fact. Okay. His height is not better than this. It just tells us where you fit in the group. There's Robin Williams, picking him out. Then he is kind of at the 25th percentile because he is taller than 1/4, but shorter than 3/4. So again, it just tells you where you fit in the group. Okay. That's Colin Firth. And again, he's about at the 90th percentile. Again, a percentile, it isn't better to be at the 90th percentile. It sounds, oh, if it was 90% as opposed to 50%, that sounds better, but it's not. He's just taller. He's taller than most. And so his percentile is higher. This is one group at which there is 100th percentile. It's because there's such a small group. Brad Garrett there, if you've been watching the Olympics, you've seen him some really bad commercials that I find really kind of not very pleasant. But anyway, he's the tallest one in the group. Of this whole group, he's the very tallest one. He is at the 100th percentile. Danny DeVito down below, he is at the 0th percentile because he's shorter than, he is the absolute shortest person in this group. When we go to growth curves, there is no 100th percentile just because it's such a big group. If to be at the 100th percentile, you would have to be the very tallest person in the whole group. And we don't know who, there are, again, tens of thousands of measurements in the group on the growth curves. So no matter how tall a child is, they are at the 99th percentile. No matter how much they weigh, they're at the 99th percentile because the 100th would imply they are the very tallest of them all, and we never can find that person. Okay. Let's take a look at some more growth curves now. So now we looked at this one earlier and we talked that you can see this is normal growth. This child is following the line, but now I want to look at that percentile again, because if now that number can make more sense. If you are following this line, as I said before, since you're following a line that's toward the top, you're bigger than average. And kind of how much bigger than average? Well, if you look at that percentile, you can see it's the 85th percentile. So if you lined up 100 children, 100 boys in this case, and measured all their heights, on average, this child would be taller than 85 out of 100 of those children. So that's what the percentiles mean there. Is it better to be at the 85th rather than down at the 50th? No, it's just that child. It's like that. It's like the smaller dogs. If you're a dog that's half the size, you're a perfectly normal dog. Being on a higher line, having a higher percentile is not better. It just tells you where you are in comparison to the rest of the group. Percentiles are tricky. This is kind of a tricky conversation. At the end, my email address is at the end of this. If people want to email me, have any questions, I can call you back and chat about this. But it's the two words are very similar. A percentage and a percentile. The words are very similar, but they're very different things. And growth curves are percentiles, not percentages. All right. So thinking about growth curves in general, couple of rules. A child's birth weight, the birth measurements in general are very helpful. If you have good, accurate measurements at birth, that's the best predictor. So if you come to me with a baby and you say, well, how tall do you think they're going to be when they're 2? I would follow the line from their birth weight. I'd follow that line out to 2 years, and I'd say, that's how tall I think they're going to be. As we talked about, each of the measurements doesn't have to be on the same line. It can be normal to have a head measurement that's bigger or a length that's bigger than the weight. What I found, I think, is that often weight and the head circumference go together more closely than length does. So if the head measurement is very different from the weight, I look at that a little more carefully than if a length measurement is different than the weight. And again, the growth curves are not the only thing that we look at. It's an important piece of information, but we just put it along with other things as well. Again, there's no 100th percentile on a growth curve. We don't know who the very tallest person is. So the highest percentile you can get is the 99th, and the lowest is the first. All right. I'm done talking about percentiles and percentages, so you can put out a little cheer if you want, and I understand that. But again, if you don't understand percentiles, it's just hard to sort those out. We're gonna finish with a little lighter dose of information. So again, take a big breath. We're in the last section of these 4. There are rules about growth. Some of them are more useful, and some of them are more accurate than others. This is medical. These are rules of thumb, though, so don't hang your hat on these. We talked earlier, where we looked at the lines on growth curves, that babies grow really fast between birth and 6 months, and then it slows down. Babies double their weight by 5 months of age. So just imagine how much you would have to eat to double, or how much growth you would do to double your weight. Babies double their weight in 5 months, and then triple their birth weight by 1 year. So I mean, that feeding is really, really important for infants because they are growing so fast, and feeding has to go well to generate that kind of growth. It's really important. And then for height, height is one where people really want, whoops, I think I've skipped one. Yeah, so for height, this one is often cited. I don't know how accurate it is. I think it may or may not be accurate for different people. But boys, you can estimate their adult height by doubling their height at age 2 years. For girls, you double their height at either different references said 18 and different said 19. That you can predict it. This is more a party game than a medical fact. But you know, if you're curious if you can predict it, that's one way to do it. This is medical information, and it kind of makes me laugh. So this is something called mid-parental height. If you forced me, if I was worried about a child's height and I wanted to calculate what I would predict their height to be, I would use a mid-parental height. What I would do, I remember being a med student and hearing this lecture, and I laughed. I went up and asked the person afterwards. I said, well, I have 5 sisters. We all have the same parents. So if I calculated the mid-parental height, it would predict that all 6 of us are the same height. But what I know is my shortest sister is barely 5'3", and my tallest sister is 5'11 and a half. And it's exactly the same formula that would predict all of those heights. And so it is, especially with that history and knowing that this is again, it's I think more party game than medical knowledge. But if you want to calculate it, for girls, average the height of the 2 parents and then subtract 2.5 inches. And for boys, average the height of the parents and add 2.5 inches. And that is a predictor, again, a weak predictor, but it does predict adult height. Okay. When I'm looking at a growth curve, even if I've got a growth curve for a child up to age 8 or 9, and you can see that they have been a tall child, I cannot, from that growth curve, cannot predict adult height. What determines adult height is how old you are when your body matures. So if children have bodies that mature when they are 11 or 12, they will end up being a shorter adult because we stop getting taller when our bodies are mature. A child who's a late bloomer, so a girl who gets a period, you know, at age 15, or a boy who doesn't start really maturing until, you know, 14, 15, 16, those people are going to be the tall adults because they have more years to get taller. All right. So this has been the focus of this talk. We talked about growth. And again, it's important because it's a good test of generally how this child is doing in lots of different ways. It importantly allows us to follow a child's growth over time to see if they're staying on a consistent line. The percentiles do allow us to compare this child's growth to know, well, how do they compare to everybody else? And kind of not just their cousin may be very, very tall. So this child looks very short, but the growth curve might show us, no, they are very average. They come up that middle line. They are average compared to a very large group of people. And these growth curves do not predict adult height, which disappoints lots of people. But again, we just have to wait to see. Okay. And I thank you for your time. If you've got any questions and we want to talk about it now, that's fine. If you've got any questions, this is my email address. If you have any questions and you wanted to email me, that would be fine too. But otherwise, thanks for your time.
If anyone does have questions, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, or if you prefer, we do have the chat function, so you can type it in there for sure. I do want to say I do not envy you the conversation or trying to explain the percentages, percentile, but I really think those graphics were very helpful. So that was really a great idea. And I just too, I like how you said, this is really just one piece of the puzzle. I think that's something we tend to forget or, want to remember in as we are looking at, especially infants, like you mentioned, birth weights are really important. When babies are losing weight initially, and we have to understand that and not jump to conclusions without some other information. So I think that's a really good point.
And then the power of getting, it's like come in 2 days, or come in a week, or come in a month. Getting that next plot, that next spot on the growth curve can be unbelievably helpful to decide how concerned or how not concerned we are.
Yeah, exactly. And I know from a breastfeeding perspective, that's not you don't make a decision right there to quit breastfeeding, which I think sometimes happens.
No.
That's the push is like, okay, they're not getting enough, but we can look at other things for breastfeeding and see that
Right.
baby is probably getting enough. So I really like that you made that point. So
yeah, patience is sometimes hard to have, but really important.
Exactly. Other questions or comments, things you're glad to hear again or that were new to you? Anything to share? Okay, not seeing anything in the chat or hearing any responses, but as mentioned, or you can see, Dr. Honish has put her information up there. If you're part of the Breastfeeding Coalition, you know she's been attending, so we really appreciate having her perspective to the Breastfeeding Coalition as well. But feel free to reach out. We did record the presentation, so if there's something you missed and you want to go back, we certainly will have that opportunity. But once again, huge thank you. I think this was a great topic, something I know I haven't seen presented to parents before, so really appreciate you took the time to do that. And you're just getting some kudos in the comments as well. Like, thank you for the presentation and thanks for taking the time to do that. So with that, we will close and thank you guys again for joining us. Remember, we do have some sessions coming up in August for breastfeeding month, so hopefully we can see you all again there. And thanks again for all of your time.
Thank you all. Thanks for your time.